to accept moral enormities we would never accept in private life. Now, the school version that I learned starting in the 6th grade, the school version of the world, runs like this. If we did not have our wise custodians in charge of us, looking down benignly upon us, and fashioning wise laws and regulations for our own good, why, all of you here in this hall would be dying instantly of poisoned food. Everyone would earn 1 cent an hour, if even that. We would have no art to speak of, because, of course, until we got the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965, everybody knows there was no art in Western civilization. We'd have no science. Everybody would be an uneducated brute, worshipping Thor. But thank goodness we have the government to rescue us from all these things. How could anyone believe in libertarianism? Well, so I'm going to run through quickly, because I got so much to tell you. I'm going to just run through quickly. When it comes to education, what was the most, in the 19th century, all the way up to the 19th century, what was the most literate society in the face of the world? It was Britain, that basically had only private education. That's not supposed to happen. That can't happen, according to the media narrative, unless we're spending, what, 25 grand per student? Is that what they're spending in Washington, D.C. now?
29.
Whatever it is, okay? And in England, they were more literate than they are in the District of Columbia, with no government funding. Or how about science? You think, oh, come on now. We can't be unreasonable. Even libertarians have to acknowledge that we need a gun in the ribs to take people's money to fund science, right? We know that. Can't have non-aggression there. Sometimes you got to just be practical. So, oh yeah? Well, guess what? Let's look at examples. It turns out that in the 19th century, you know how much money the British spent? Public money they spent on science? 0. And who led the world in scientific discoveries and achievements? Of course, Britain. Meanwhile, who's spending money hand over fist? The French and the Germans. And they're way behind. Now, that's not something you learn in school. But I bet you, if it were the opposite, we would never hear the end of it. If the British had spent and spent and spent, and then they were the best, and the French and the Germans spent nothing and they lagged behind, we would never hear the end of all the moral lectures about how backward and stupid our dumb principles are. But when it turns out our way, crickets. Or how about poverty? Oh my goodness, libertarians don't care about poverty. Oh yeah? Oh yeah? Look at the 20th century. Look at the progress that was made against poverty. Poverty, by today's standards, in the year 1900 was at 95%, if you were measuring it by the standards of today. 95%. By the time the federal government finally began doing much of anything about it, which was after the Great Society, and it was really Richard Nixon who started to fund the Great Society. And by the way, Richard Nixon indirectly created the Libertarian Party by being so terrible, so do indirectly acknowledge that. Thanks for your terribleness. But at that time, when the government got involved, the progress against poverty, the poverty finally began to plateau. Now again, imagine if it had been the opposite. Imagine we'd been spending government money year after year and poverty fell, and then libertarians took over and we stopped winning this war on poverty. We would never hear the end of it. But when it turns out our way, crickets. Or I'll just give a quick example, safety, because apparently libertarians, we don't care about safety. We want you to drink a glass of water and die instantly. We want your computer monitor to explode in your face. We want a giant spike to come through your steering wheel, right through your skull. So I should say a brief word about this. There's so much more that can be said. I have a book, by the way. I have a book table out there. This book called Rollback. It has basically everything you've ever had to deal with, like you know, all these arguments, it's all in there in more detail. But take, for example, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration started in the mid-60s-ish. And ever since then, the number of traffic fatalities per mile traveled has fallen 3.5% a year. They say, doesn't this go to show that thanks to the government you're getting safer? But you know what they don't bother to ask? What was the rate of decline before they started this agency? 3.5% a year. Not bad. Or OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health. My goodness, steel beams would be falling on your head if it wasn't for OSHA looking after you. Because just look at the numbers. After we started OSHA in the early 70s, we got workplace fatalities going down. But you know what they don't ask? What was the trend in workplace fatalities before we got OSHA? Do you think any of the media people have any idea what the answer to that question is? In fact, workplace fatalities and injuries were falling 70% faster before we even got OSHA. Nobody knows that. So this is what I mean. The case for our position is not that difficult to make, because everybody can understand the basic moral principle of non-aggression, and anybody can understand these basic statistics about some of the areas in which we're supposedly weak, because supposedly we'd be weak on safety and so on and on. But it turns out we're not so weak on that. And when it comes to poverty, well, what's been the trend in the development of markets around the world over the past 2 centuries? It's been the liberalization, the opening up of markets. And as markets have opened, poverty has fallen dramatically. Absolute poverty, which is a measure economists have been known to use, was at 85% in the year 1820. By the time you get to 1950, it's down to 50%. By the early 80s, it's down to 1/3. And by the beginning of this millennium, it was down to 18%. There has been more progress made against poverty in the past 50 years than in the previous 500. We've never seen the absolute number and the percentage of people in poverty fall. At the very time that markets are being liberated around the world. Now, not as fast as they should be, and not as thoroughly as they should be, but more or less in the right direction. Now, this is the opposite of what we should expect if the media is correct. This should have been a disaster for everyone. And in fact, there's been so little acknowledgement. I mean, wouldn't you think there'd be one headline about this once in a while? You know, we're doing better against poverty than ever before in history. I'm telling you, if you were to ask 10 people on the street, how do you think we're doing against poverty? I would bet you at least 7 out of 10 would say it's worse than ever, right? I bet the Bernie Sanders people all think it's worse than ever. I bet any college graduate today thinks it's worse than ever. It's better than ever, and it's so much better, it's almost laughable. Nobody knows this. And incidentally, if you want to increase the standard of living, the formula we're being given is not to expand markets, it's to raise the minimum wage. So my old friend Walter Block said, just at a conference last week, he made an excellent point. He said, isn't it funny? We have people on the left who say they favor foreign aid for poor countries. And they also favor, in the United States, the minimum wage. Well, why don't we tell them, if it's that easy to make everybody richer, just tell those poor countries you don't need any aid, just raise your minimum wage. Or child labor, right? All our kids will be working in mines. Look, I have 5 girls, 5 young girls. Ain't no way to let my girls work in a mine. How did that happen then? Why was there child labor? You know, the thing is, sometimes we're being asked to answer the wrong question. Sometimes we're being asked, why is there poverty? When the correct question is, why is there wealth? Poverty is the natural human condition. We were not born into this world as a species with Cadillacs. We were born impoverished. Wealth is what needs to be explained. Likewise, it's not child labor that needs to be explained. It's the absence of child labor. Because child labor has existed since the beginning of time. And is that because they were all terrible parents up until the 20th century? Or all the terrible parents all decided to move to Bangladesh in 1960 or something, and that's why there's so much child poverty over there? Even the International Labor Organization admits the reason you have child labor is that these families will starve without it. Now, does that mean I support child labor? What it means is, I'm not going to be one of these moronic leftists who signs a petition to get rid of child labor in Bangladesh or Nepal or whatever, only to find out that Oxfam discovers that what happened to these kids is they either starved to death or went into prostitution. Well, they hadn't bothered to pencil into their busy schedules the obvious consequences of this. So how did we get rid of child labor? Well, anybody who read a 7th grade textbook knows, well, the government passed a law against it. That'll show you libertarians. Yeah, the government passes a law against it when 90% of it has already gone away because of the free market. Because what actually happens is, Businesses earn profits. They reinvest the profits into capital equipment. That capital equipment makes our economy more productive. There's more physical stuff. This puts downward pressure on prices vis-a-vis wages. And now the purchasing power of the mother and father's paycheck extends far enough that they don't have to send the kids to work anymore.